So a brand new meta-analysis was just published in Nutrients. 28 randomized controlled trials, nearly 1,800 participants, and the researchers wanted to know something most fasting studies don't look at very closely. Does age influence results? And it turns out it does. When the researchers separated participants by age, everything changed. Some people improved where others didn't. Some people saw benefits that came with major trade-offs. And one of the most interesting, unexpected patterns showed up in people over 40. So today I want to walk you guys through exactly what they found, because buried inside this data are several findings that don't get talked about nearly enough. And if you're fasting right now or thinking about fasting, these are things worth knowing. So let's jump right into the benefits, the trade-offs, and the surprises that were found in this meta-analysis. Researchers went through and separated participants into 3 distinct buckets: an under 30 group, a 30 to 45 group, and a 45 plus group. We're going to start with the youngest group first because their data sets up the entire story. In the under 30 group, a lot of things went right. Insulin sensitivity improved, body fat decreased, and it revealed that several metabolic markers were moving in the right direction. If you just look at the standard fat loss tracking sheet, you would call this an absolute win. But there was a catch. This group also experienced an increase in LDL cholesterol. And it wasn't a tiny one. We're talking nearly 7 points on average. Now, for those that want context, most guidelines consider anything under 100 milligrams per deciliter to be optimal. A jump in 10 points or more is where doctors typically start paying closer attention. So 7 points isn't a medical crisis, but it's not nothing either. And if your LDL is already elevated, that 7 points lands very differently than it does for someone starting from a healthy baseline. So does fasting cause this spike in younger adults? Well, when you fast, your body forces a shift in fuel sources. It starts breaking down stored body fat to use for energy, and then it moves that fat through your bloodstream so your cells can actually burn it. Your liver has to pack it into lipoproteins and then process it. And this can create a temporary surge in circulating LDL cholesterol. For a young, metabolically flexible person, this might just be a normal adaptive response to energy restriction. But for someone already dealing with underlying metabolic issues, insulin resistance, or poor baseline cardiovascular health, that 7-point jump can be the tipping point that moves them from a safe zone into a high-risk category. And something else showed up too. This group also lost lean muscle mass. They lost weight, yes, but a portion of that weight was the tissue we want to keep as we get older. And hold on to that detail for a second, because we'll be addressing the same issue when we look at the older adults. Next was the 30 to 45 group. And honestly, this group raised more questions than answers. Weight loss was relatively consistent here, but when researchers looked at many of the major health markers, the results were completely all over the place. Some markers improved, some markers barely moved. As a whole, there wasn't a single consistent pattern reported here. It didn't look like the younger group, and it didn't look like the older group, which we'll get into either. So why did this specific age range land somewhere in the chaotic middle? The paper describes their responses as highly variable. And while the researchers didn't provide a definitive smoking gun explanation for this, there are some highly reasonable real-world possibilities. Think about this stage of life. At this exact age, lifestyle stress levels are often at their absolute peak. This is the peak of building careers, raising young families, managing heavy financial responsibilities, experiencing chronic sleep disturbances, and navigating early hormonal shifts. All of these external factors trigger cortisol production, which directly influences metabolic health and can easily blunt the positive effects of a fasting window. It's also possible that many individuals in this age range start with relatively good baseline health, which means there might simply be less room for dramatic improvement. But whatever the underlying explanation may be, this just reminds us of something very important. Intermittent fasting isn't a magic switch, it's a tool. And how well that tool works depends entirely on the unique biology of the person using it. All right. Now, let's get to the main event, the 45 plus group. This is where the data gets incredibly compelling and where the trade-offs become critical to understand. On one hand, this group showed some notable massive improvements in cardiovascular and metabolic markers. Triglycerides went down, systolic blood pressure improved, fasting insulin improved, and markers of overall insulin sensitivity decreased. For anyone looking to optimize their aging process and protect their heart, those are major victories. But this group came with two specific findings we absolutely need to talk about. First, let's talk about the LDL signal. In the primary analysis, LDL cholesterol in the over 45 group didn't appear to change significantly. And if the paper would have just stopped there, you wouldn't have seen any meaningful increase. But remember, this was a massive project analyzing 28 different studies. So some studies would show little change and some studies would show larger change. So the data got diluted when everything was averaged together. But when the researchers performed a more conservative statistical analysis, which is a standard scientific way of testing how stable and real a finding actually is, a small increase in LDL cholesterol appeared. But I want to keep this real. The change itself was small. We're not talking about a dramatic spike, a health emergency, or a reason to panic. But even with all the variations between those 28 studies, that cholesterol signal still managed to show up. And that tells us something important. Not everyone responds to fasting the same way. Some people may see improvements in cholesterol. Others may see it step upwards. That's why it's vital to take into consideration where your own personal health stands. If your LDL is already elevated, if you have a heavy family history of cardiovascular disease, or if you've been told you're at higher risk, it's a clear reason to pay attention and monitor your lab work more closely. Now, someone is going to hear this and say, that's white noise, David. It's small, it doesn't matter. And for a perfectly healthy person with zero cardiovascular risk factors, maybe they're right. But remember this before you drop the dogma. It's very easy to dismiss a small risk when you're not the one carrying it. In other words, it's easy to call something insignificant when you're not the one living with elevated cholesterol, a family history of heart disease, or other cardiovascular risks. The takeaway from this isn't that fasting is dangerous. The takeaway is that biology is messy, and a one-size-fits-all approach just doesn't exist. And that brings us to the second catch for the 45-plus group, the decrease in muscle mass. This may be the single most important finding in this entire paper. And yes, we did see this in the under 30 group as well. But here's why the finding for the 45-plus group deserves serious attention and a warning sign. When researchers analyzed this older group, they found a significant reduction in fat-free mass, which includes muscle, but also other lean tissues throughout the body. Now, on paper, that may not sound like a catastrophic big deal, but context matters, because if you're 25 years old and lose a little bit of muscle, it's okay. Your baseline hormone levels are primed for growth, and you can actually rebuild that muscle fairly quickly. But if you're over 45 and beyond, this whole picture changes, and so does our fundamental biology. As we age, the body doesn't repair and rebuild muscle like it used to, and we desperately need that muscle. It helps us stay active, it protects our bones from injury, it boosts our resting metabolism, and it acts like a massive sink to help regulate blood sugar levels, and that's a big bonus for someone like me as a type 1 diabetic. Losing muscle as an older adult isn't just about looking less fit. It's a direct threat to your long-term health span. Now, I'm not sharing this to tell you to stop fasting, nor were the researchers suggesting that. In fact, because of these exact trade-offs, the researchers of this study actually proposed a solution. They referred to it as IF+, the IF+ approach. Intermittent fasting combined with intentional resistance training and adequate protein intake. If you're over 45 and you want to fast safely, your protocol has to be smarter. There are 3 things you need to consider to make this work. First, prioritize protein. Both quantity and quality matter. Many experts recommend targeting somewhere around 0.7 to 0.9 grams of protein per pound of body weight during your eating window. But there's another hidden layer to this, unfortunately. As we age, our muscles become less responsive to protein. Researchers refer to this biological shift as anabolic resistance. When we're young, even a small amount of protein triggers muscle protein synthesis. But as you cross 45, you need a higher concentration of essential amino acids, especially leucine, in a single meal just to flip that muscle protein building switch. If you are skipping meals through fasting and then eating low protein foods during your window, you are actively driving muscle loss. Second, you must lift weights. Fasting tells the body to clear out old tissue. Resistance training tells the body to keep, protect, and rebuild your muscle. You need that counter signal. And third, monitor your blood work. Don't guess. Know your numbers. Fasting can do incredible things for your blood pressure and your insulin levels, but you need to make sure your cholesterol isn't paying the price. At the end of the day, intermittent fasting is a powerful tool, but its success depends entirely on the person using that tool. One final note. At the end of the day, this study doesn't just tell us that fasting is good or bad. It tells us something more useful. Age matters, context matters. And the most effective fasting strategy may not be the same strategy for everyone. If you've been fasting, let us know what's worked for you. Your experience may help someone who's trying to figure out what works best for them. This is David. Thanks for watching and thanks for contributing in the comment section. And I'll see you guys in the next one.